So hello everyone, and thank you for joining the session tonight. I'm happy for you to, it is being recorded, I think, so that's good. On behalf of the University of Queensland, I would just like again to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm working this evening, and on my own behalf to recognise the tremendous artistic and cultural heritage of the Yagra and Turrbal peoples, as well as all First Australians and First Nations people in all of the countries from which we're meeting, and extend my respects to any First Nations people who are on this call. So in this session, I want to introduce you to a new action research project and peer coaching program, which I've been working on this year for the arts and culture sector, which is known as Creating Out Loud. And I've put the URL for my project website and the QR code on this slide in case you'd like to look at it later. But I will also just now send some things into the chat, which are the website and a couple of articles, one that I'll refer to in a minute. So as we all know, there has been tremendous disruption to the arts and culture sector over the past 18 months. Countless people have lost income as well as important opportunities for creating and showing their work. But even before the pandemic, making a living in the arts and culture sector was notoriously hard. And people have already referred to that. And I have also explained this or discussed this in an article that was published in The Conversation just today. So that was nice timing. During the pandemic, there's been some good news and some excellent new programs have been developed, but not everyone has had access to government funding, and not all of the new programs, no matter how good they are, not all of them have been funded in an ongoing manner. So I have been working along with some of Australia's key arts organisations throughout 2021 to develop a new peer coaching program for people working in the arts and culture sector. And our goal is to make Creating Out Loud a free and sustainable form of peer support for artists and arts managers, which will be made available, freely available online in the middle of 2022 to anyone who might like to use it. So I'm here to tell you what it is and where the project is up to. Of course, traditional mentoring is very common in the arts, and it can be extremely effective, but it can also be very expensive and difficult to access. By contrast, peer coaching, which involves people of equal status coming together in a focused way to help one another pursue personal and professional goals, is low cost, can even be free. It can be made available to anyone who wants to participate. And research tells us that it has been very effective and sustainable way of giving and receiving support in quite diverse settings. So peer coaching circles, small groups, not just dyadic coaching, but peer coaching circles are very common in education and increasingly so in business. And my Creating Out Loud project is informed both by the scholarly literature on peer coaching and two successful international peer coaching programs developed for business, which are the Lean In Circles and Working Out Loud. So in phase one of this study, I collaborated with my industry partners to run a pilot of the Working Out Loud program and also established a needs assessment survey, which is ongoing. And the early findings from the survey, as well as the results from the pilot, have fed into phase two of the project, which I'm just wrapping up right now, which involved designing a 6-week peer coaching program specific to the arts and culture sector. And I've run this program with 14 peer coaching circles around Australia. 10 of them met online, 4 of them met face-to-face here in Brisbane, with 62 participants. Who represented major and small to medium companies, as well as independent arts workers and people in government. And they were working across art forms, including music, theatre, circus, and ballet. So each session involved a guided discussion addressing one of the 5 key topic areas as identified through the needs assessment survey. These are communicating the value of the arts, sustainability, which includes diversity, equity, and learning from First Nations arts and cultural practices. Well-being, which includes coping with precarity, alternative business models, and artistic practice. So those were issues that were identified through the survey, and you can see that I've got 5 sort of big topic areas, and within each topic area, I've developed 1 discussion guide so far per colour category. So the sessions are designed to last just under 1 hour, although I do, as a teacher, as well as a peer coaching guide developer, I do tend to put quite a lot in. So preliminary feedback suggests that they could run for much longer if groups wanted to do that. They begin with an activity to help participants settle into the circle, to be present with the other members of the circle. And it's also an opportunity to report back on steps that they may have taken since the previous meeting. The core part of each session combines an individual reflection with group discussion on the topic of the day, and the discussion guides provide some research-based information and provocations on that topic. And then the session wraps up with an invitation to identify one thing that each participant would like to try to do before the next session. And this is a gentle form of accountability with no judgment, but an encouragement that the fellow circle members will ask you how you went with that during the week. So that gives people a little nudge without putting too much pressure on them. So while I am still analysing the results of phase 2, the preliminary findings are very promising, so I want to share those with you now. The survey responses indicate I did pre and post surveys as well as the needs assessment survey. So the survey responses, post-circle survey responses indicate that artists and arts workers see peer coaching circles as appealing, as worth the time commitment, as easy to use, and as a realistic support for people working in the sector. On a more personal note, most participants found that their own peer coaching circle made a positive contribution to their well-being and was an appointment that they looked forward to. They reported feeling understood and accepted by one another, and to be operating within an atmosphere of helping one another. And they believed that the peer coaching experience helped them develop as a person, to learn from how others in the sector pursue their goals, and in groups that were set up intentionally to connect people across organisations, locations, and art forms. People also reported that they benefited by expanding their professional network. Qualitatively, participants valued connecting with new and diverse peers and having meaningful conversations. And as you can see in this quotation, some participants felt that peer coaching, the framework of peer coaching, provided a way of talking about important topics that might not otherwise come up in conversation with their everyday contacts. The participants valued giving and receiving mutual support. And as you can see in the quotations on this slide, that support included connecting with people around the country and being reminded that there is, in fact, solidarity within the sector. And this latter point is particularly salient in Australia, where radical cuts to public funding of the arts in the past decade have produced what several people describe in research that I have done previously, which I put a link to in the chat. Several people have described the sector as having a Hunger Games mentality. The participants in the peer coaching program so far have also valued the research-based content and resources that are provided within the discussion guides. So at the end of the guide, where people are given an opportunity to plan their next steps, there are several resources on the topic related to the day, which are optional steps that someone might take, but there are also things that someone can look back on later if they want to pursue that topic further at a later date. And lastly, participants valued the fact that this is a self-facilitated program. So group members shared responsibility for facilitating the discussion, either by rotating the facilitator role or just jointly keeping track of the discussion throughout the meetings. But they liked having a pre-prepared discussion guide, which took the pressure off facilitators. They could work with what was in the materials rather than having to create their own materials or their own topic or questions. They could stick to the guides as closely as they wanted to, or they could follow other points of interest as they arose, depending on the group. So ultimately, a nice high percentage of participants said that they were either likely or very likely to join a peer coaching circle in future, to recommend peer coaching to a colleague in the sector, and or to download the peer coaching guides that will be made available. So from this point, I'll be finalising the program over the Southern Hemisphere summer before running and evaluating some more groups with further materials early next year. And the final program, as I mentioned, will be freely available, downloadable. There will be a discussion guide library. And my aim is to create 20 guides, which would provide enough material. So 20 guides would be 4 guides per colour, per big topic area. That would make enough material for 2 years worth of monthly meetings if groups chose to meet monthly. They could start with the initial 6-week program and then extend on by selecting more topics from the library for as long as they would like. Or they might just create their own program right from the outset, picking just those topics that most interest them. So they could only focus in on the green, orange, blue, red, or purple sector, depending on the group's interests. So in addition to the topic discussion guides, I'll also be producing some supplementary resources. The first of these will be how-to guides for goal-focused peer coaching. So rather than pursue the topic discussions, some groups may want to focus in on the individual goals of each member, and there are some well-established models for doing that. So I'll be creating goal-focused peer coaching guides that could either be used alone or they could alternate with topic discussion guides, again, depending on what the individual group members want to do. Second extra resource will be some facilitator guides to provide extra support for people who are not experienced with facilitating small groups. And the third will be some resources that groups might like to use before getting started, laying the foundations for constructive engagement, such as dealing with conflict, respecting other people's points of view, finding positive or constructive ways to acknowledge other people's contributions even when you disagree, and establishing a general working agreement for the group that promotes psychological safety and well-being within the small group context. And we did run a preliminary session that dealt with those kinds of issues before a series of 8 groups met over the 6-week period. And if I can pull it off in time, I'm also looking at creating video resources to accompany the discussion guide, the thematic discussion guides, so that some of that research material that initially went into the guides can be front-loaded to reduce the amount of reading that people are facing when they come to the discussion guide. So there we go. That's the program as it stands. I'd be very happy to hear from you with any questions, or if you would like to get in touch about possibly testing the new materials early in the new year, or working with the existing 6-week program in a self-facilitated way. But at this point, the rollout will be the middle of next year, and I'm in consultation with some of the key organisations in Australia, so the Australia Council, the Rural Arts Services Network, the Arts Centre in Melbourne, and of course being in Queensland with Arts Queensland. So thanks very much for listening, and please feel free to send through or raise any questions.
Wonderful, Kate. That's incredibly comprehensive. Well done. That was really enjoyable and fantastic that we've got someone so hardworking as yourself. There must be 3 of you, and you must own 4 time turners or something of the effect. So well done. It was very enjoyable, and I really like the idea of the peer coaching being self-facilitated as well. And that deliberate practice of doing so is really useful, because musicians, particularly artists, are just so busy, and actually specifically doing it. And as you say, your participants said that there were conversations that they just otherwise wouldn't have had, and these are conversations that are actually needed. Do we have any questions from our our delegates this evening at all?
I've got a question to ask.
Yes,
Thank you
Eden.
so much for presenting, Kate. That was really interesting. I'm currently an undergrad music student in my first year, so it's really interesting hearing this insight about peer coaching, because I feel like within my undergraduate, I haven't had specific time just to talk about that sort of aspect of the music industry. So, in applying that practically, if, for example, it was at a university, would you have exclusively university students within the peer group, or would you encourage, say, older musicians or emerging musicians into the conversation as well?
Yeah, thanks very much, Eden. That's a great question. So the groups that I've run so far, I've tried several different configurations. So I've run groups within organizations. So there've been 4 groups that operated solely with the staff members of a particular organization. 3 of those, one of them is the top level executive leaders of the organization. And then there were 2 that were sort of one step down from that, arts managers or arts workers. Another one were the actors from La Boite's artist company, so all creatives in that group. Separately to that, I've run a group that involved the human resources directors at major performing arts companies around Australia. Separate to that, I've got a small group that's just in its final couple of weeks right now, which is visual artists. And in that group, there are some people who are quite established in their career with a brand new graduate who is just straight out of uni. And the same thing with the artist company. Some of the members of the actors in the artist company group were more established, and there's a brand new, freshly graduated actor straight out of uni. And then the 8 groups that were organised sort of as a package deal, it was Theatre Network Australia who put those groups together for me. And they had people at all different levels, all different art forms, locations all around Australia. So if it were put into a university context, there's no reason why either an instructor or students on their own couldn't use those resources within a class or separate to a class. The tricky part of this program is connecting people who don't already know each other. So, you know, we all know about book clubs, and people set up book clubs, and that's been a wonderful thing that's spread around the world, but you tend to just join a book club with people that you know. And part of the value of this, based on the groups that I've run so far, the groups where people knew each other have been very effective and great. But the groups where people didn't know each other yet have just really been very special opportunity for those people. So as I mentioned, I'm sort of looking at ways to facilitate connecting people. And one idea is the Australia Council runs leadership programs every year, and they're traditional sort of mentoring opportunities, and hundreds of people don't get in. So we're looking at talking with the Australia Council about facilitating groups for all the people who applied who didn't get in, and they would be self-facilitated groups, but the Australia Council would actually do that legwork of joining people together who don't already know each other.
What a
Thank you so
fantastic
much.
idea. Yeah, great question, Eden. Thanks so much for asking it too. That's brilliant. It's a great idea. Fantastic idea, Kate. And I wish you all the best with that. And I have a funny feeling it's not the last we're going to hear from that from you. So terrific idea. I think it's fabulous.